Genesis chapter 11. So this is the last chapter of what you might say is a unique section of Bible text. You know, it's after the flood, but it's before Abraham. And in many ways, chapters 10 and 11 are the conclusion of the flood story. And so they have the antediluvian fathers, those people who were alive before the flood. And then we have the breakdown of what happened immediately after the flood. And then we jump another big, long genealogy all the way down to Abraham. And so our last big story before we move on to all these other things is in chapter 11, verse 1, it says, "Now the whole earth had one language and one speech." And that makes sense because they were all one big family. "And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, 'Come, and let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth.'" Now, something to consider as I wipe out my eyes. Oh, I'm better now. This overlaps with chapter 10. Chapter 10 does the whole table of nations. So this kind of fit inside there. And they went to the land of Shinar. Now that's back in chapter 10, verse 10, where Nimrod built Babel in the land of Shinar, the plain of Shinar. And so they go there and they want to build a big tower. And they didn't want to get spread all out, which is fascinating because God talked about being fruitful and multiplying and going out and covering the globe and doing that. And these people wanted to gather together. And perhaps they wanted to stay together to maybe cause some problems and do things they weren't supposed to do. So verse 5, it says, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So Babel, gateway to God, is actually, if you take Bav, El, and a lot of the B's sound like V's, Babel. But the idea is they were trying to worship the heavens. They were trying to get up into the heavens. And once again, it was becoming a man-centered thing. And God wanted mankind to spread out and get around the globe. And once again, they were disobeying God's commands. And so God did something really simple. He divided their languages. And when he divided their languages, then they, of course, divided amongst people with similar languages. And we find back in chapter 10, verse 25, to Eber was born two sons. One was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. And that's the idea of the earth being divided. Now, what's cool about this, though, is the fact that if we take the Bible at face value and take this story as, okay, they came off the flood. We have a few generations of children being born. We still have people living hundreds of years old. Ham, Shem, and Japheth lived up to in the 400s, I believe. I actually have to go double check here. They begot Shem and lived 500 years. So yeah, 500 years. And so a lot of kids are being born. The world is growing. But as they get spread out over the globe, you have to think that a lot of these stories are still with the people. So here's some cool things. You can look at ancient Chinese, and when you start seeing things like the symbol for life man is like dust or dirt or earth plus breath equals man. And we see how God took the formed man and breathed into him. And there's all these things like that's kind of fascinating when you have man on a boat and equaling flood. And there's so ancient Chinese is a fun study you can write there. The old ancient Chinese pictography. You can look at the different nations around the globe that have flood legends. There's over 60 or 70 ancient tribal stories, traditions about how the whole earth was flooded with water, and some guy on a boat with a whole lot of animals is the one who came off the flood. Some of them, it's the creation story for them. Others, if it's actually a flood that came after creation. But the whole idea is you see the roots going back to these same things. And then we find things like Adoniram Judson was a missionary in the early 1800s in the area of Burma. And so you're looking down there in between India and Thailand, kind of in that general area, right? And there's a tribal people, not Burmese, but they were the Karen people. And they lived up in the hills, and they were totally isolated. They didn't get along with the Burmese, but there were many of these Karen tribes. When Adoniram Judson went there from England, bringing his missionaries with him, when they finally connected with these people, what they found was a group of tribal people who had been worshiping for thousands of years, literally thousands of years, in these villages up in the jungles, of which you can't even get to during certain parts of the year because the monsoons and floods makes all the rivers too just insanely powerful. So pretty much there's only certain times you can get back there to see these people. But what they found was they had this story. Their religion was that this guy, God, Yehu, he created man and woman and put them in a garden, and they were deceived by this evil one. What was his name? Nupali, something like that. And he deceived them. And what happened was Yehu left them, man and woman, under the bondage of this evil person, this evil spirit. And when he left them with a promise that one day pale men would come from over the sea and they'd bring them the white book, in which they would have the message of how to restore them back to Yehu. It's this kind of stuff. You just can't make it up. And it's in our history, and it's in our textbooks, and it's all around, but it's stuff that, gets kind of brushed under the rug. If you want to read about that in a big boy book, we did the White Book with Jubilee for homeschooling, and Judah did it too, but Eternity in Their Hearts. It's a book that goes through different tribal nations or tribal peoples around the world who had ancient traditions that are just so straight out of Genesis, and yet they were waiting for someone to bring them the gospel, to bring them the true and full revelation of what God had to offer them. And so we see this, and we see these things that testify of the Tower of Babel. Once again, that at one point, all people had everything from Genesis 11 backwards. So it's just a good mind. Genesis 11 backwards, all people, all nations, tribes, and tongues had that. And then they were scattered. And we see these people and nations around the globe today. And so it's just not hard to validate the message of the Bible, to show through archaeology, history, tradition, culture, DNA. It all points back to this book that we believe in. And so we must take it upon ourselves, being surrounded by such a cloud of testimonies, of witnesses and evidences and truth, many infallible truths. How ought we to live? And that's the whole idea, is that letting these things sink in and take root and really impact us to the point where we do forsake this world and being conformed to it and be transformed by the renewing of our minds to be living sacrifices and to start putting our money where our mouth is. It was great to see a few of you guys come out with us as we were doing street ministry this week and stuff like that. It's like more Christians need to be doing this. More Christians need to be lovingly and actively sharing their faith in a proactive way. More than just, as it comes up. It's like, no, like go out of your way. Go out of your way to be a Christian. Go out of your way to share the gospel. Because in all honesty, yes, we will share it. Hopefully all of us would share it when the opportunities present themselves. When someone comes up to you and says, what is the meaning of this, Isaiah 53, like Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, it's like, well, duh, that you share the gospel. But that we would not just do it when it's convenient and not just do it when it just hits us in the face like a semi-truck, but that we would do it where it's inconvenient. I pray to God that more Christians would inconvenience themselves for the sake of Christ and the sake of the gospel. Hopefully you can make that choice too. All right. We got another genealogy tomorrow. Gotta love these genealogies. Let's not argue and dispute over these genealogies, because that would be unbiblical. But they're fun to learn a few little more facts. So we'll move through this next genealogy and we'll make our way to Terah and Abraham tomorrow. And then we get to move through some exciting stuff. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and to move through the rest of the book of Genesis. So the stories will pick up, but there's obviously some very, very rich things for us in there. Genesis 12, Genesis 22, Genesis 14, Genesis 30. There's a lot of cool stories in there. So God bless you guys. Have an amazing day. And what's today? Today's Wednesday. Church prayer tonight. That would be inconvenient, huh? To go out of your way to pray for the lost and our church and our town. Food for thought. Love you guys.